In this video, we're going to be replacing front brakes on this 2005 Honda Element. To remove our wheel, it's going to be a 19mm socket. I'll take our wheel off now. So our backing plate here is pretty well rusted and corroded. We're just going to make it go away. We're going to remove our caliper. We have two bolts, top and bottom. They're going to be 14mm. At this point, when we have both of these bolts broken free, we're going to make sure we have some kind of hanger ready to hang our caliper on to keep stress off of the brake line or the brake hose. Sometimes these calipers will come right off the brakes. Sometimes you'll need to get in here and pry them off. This one slid off no problem. So what we can do is take our hanger, swing it around here, and we're going to hang it right on the spring, up and out of the way. Now we can see our pads. I'm going to remove our spring hardware. Just squeeze and remove. And our pads. Our pads should pop straight out. Same thing on this side. Now to remove our caliper, we have two bolts on the back. They're going to be 17mm. We did switch over to our breaker bar because these are going to be heavily torqued in. Now at this point we can remove our caliper bracket and set that aside. So now the only thing holding our rotor in place would typically be two screws, Phillips screws. We have one missing. We do have one still here. We're going to use an impact driver here to try and break that screw free. Just going to see if it will turn by itself, and it won't. So as you hit this, it's going to turn that Phillips screw, hopefully breaking it free. There we go. We can set that screw aside. Now that the Phillips screw's out, our rotor usually comes off just like this. Sometimes you might need to hit it from the back or the front with the rubber mallet to break it free, but this one's free. So go ahead and take this right off. So now at this point, we're going to want to make sure that this hub surface is nice and clean and ready to receive the back of our rotor. This is actually very clean, but if yours needed a little bit more attention and it had some corrosion on there, you can get in there with a wire brush and clean up whatever you need to. If you need to use an air tool or lightly sand off some really heavy corrosion, you can do that. Ours just has some nasty grease and oil built up on here. We're going to hit it with some brake clean. Just give it a quick little dry, because what we're going to do from here is hit it with some anti-seize We'll let that flash off for a minute and we'll come back with some anti-seize spray. So now we're going to use some anti-seize, but we're going to use it in an aerosol form. So instead of spraying everything in the general area, we're just going to use our paper towel here just to stop it from getting where it doesn't need to be. We're just going to put a light coat on our hub surface. So now that our anti-seize has dried up a little bit, what we're going to do is take our new rotor, we're going to put it on backwards. We're going to take some brake clean. You can see there's greases and oils and dirt all on this. So we're going to take some brake clean and we're going to clean up the oils and greases on the back side. Give it a quick wipe. And we're going to flip it and do the same thing on the front side. But once we're done with the front side, it's going to stay in place. So we're going to line up our Phillips screw holes. We're going to put it in place. We're going to use some brake clean, clean the outer surface. Again, give it another wipe. And for this vehicle specifically, we only had one Phillips screw in our old rotor, so we're going to replace the one screw. So we're going to push our rotor in nice and tight. We're going to pick one of the two and put our Phillips screw in. I'm going to hold the rotor in place and we're going to tighten that down. All right, so we have our caliper bracket set up on our bench here. We're going to prep our caliper bracket to put back in the vehicle. We're going to put some new hardware on it and some new grease. This caliper bracket is actually in fantastic shape. So it doesn't need a lot of cleaning, but we're still going to go through the normal steps. First thing we're going to do is take out the old hardware. We're going to press and pop that old hardware out, top and bottom. And we can discard the old hardware. Your new brake pads will come with new hardware. Next thing we're going to do is take out our caliper pins. All right, so we're just going to check real quick and see if they move freely, if they spin, if they come out and go in. These actually move really freely, so we shouldn't have a lot to deal with on the cleanup side. I'm going to start down here. I'm going to grab the pin itself, and we're going to just pull it straight out. If the boot comes with it, fantastic. If not, no big deal. Take your pin out and set it aside. What I'm actually going to do for this is put down a clean rag. Set our pins on there so we're not catching any dirt. Even though we will clean them, we're going to put them back on here. And do the top, do the same thing. Grab our pin, pull straight out. You'll notice this one is slightly different than that one. It has a little rubber on the end. We're going to make sure we know where they go. In this case, the one without the rubber is going to go on the side with the number stamped into it. We're also going to remove our boots. So we're going to grab those, squeeze in, and pull out. Put those aside as well. What we're going to do is run some brake clean in here and get out as much of the old grease as we can, even though this is in really good shape. I'm just going to give this a quick clean. Let that drain. So now what we're going to do is take our caliper pins one at a time. We're going to hit those with some brake clean as well. Mainly to wet the rag. We're going to use the rag and clean up any old grease. Now these are in great shape, but this is the process you would want to do even if they were in great shape or if they were in bad shape. Ultimately, with bad shaped ones, you'll be taking off some old chunky grease. These are cleaning up really well. Unless your caliper is in great shape, you're probably dealing with a slightly different situation. You definitely want to do this. All right, set those down. And the boots, we're going to do the same thing, but these are a little different. We're just going to hose these out, some brake clean, and squeeze them. If you have a small brush to get in there, it would be a good idea to do that. All right, so now you get a nice clean rubber boot. And again, everything is coated in brake clean, so we're going to have to let that sit and dry. Do the same thing for the other one. Now that we have our caliper pin areas dried out, what we're going to do is flip it up on its head and clean out where the brake hardware is going to go. Again, these are very clean. So instead of using a wire brush, what you see on here on this caliper bracket, this gray coating, is an anti-corrosive coating. For the most part, it's doing its job. If we hit this now with a wire brush, we're going to remove some of that coating. It doesn't look corroded in here. There is a slight bit of rust on the surface, or just a coloring, stain. Same thing over here, just a little bit of stain, but there's no major corrosion. So we're not going to remove that coating. What we're going to do is just clean this with some brake clean and a rag. Now if inside of here you had rust or corrosion or loose crust in there, you're going to want to come in here with a wire brush and clean all that up the best you can so it's nice and flat. In this case, it's clean enough where I don't want to remove this anti-corrosive coating. All right, so that looks pretty clean. What we're going to do now is a light coat of grease, and this is going to help keep this surface free of rust and corrosion. This is going to stop the moisture from sitting in underneath our hardware and creating that rust. All right, now we have a light coat of grease, top and bottom. We can take our new brake hardware, set that in. Just going to set it right on top, and we're going to press it right down. Sometimes these get a little bit banged up and squished in shipping. It might take a little bit extra persuasion, but they should go right into place and snap down. If you're finding that they're not going into place and snapping down, you may have to clean the surface inside a little bit more. Like I said, these are actually very clean, so we should have no issues. All right, so our hardware is in. We can flip it on its side now. We can locate our stamped number, match it up with our caliper pins so they're going back into the same places. We're going to start by putting our boots in. We're going to put this side in first. Just going to squish it down in there into place. Same thing on the top. Then we're going to take our caliper pins. We're going to take a light coat of grease and go all the way up to this top rib here. All the way down. Then just a light thin coat. Too much grease here will actually be a bad thing. As long as you do a nice thin coat, you'll be okay. So once we have that thin coat all the way up to that rib, we're going to press it into place. Just put it in. We're going to squeeze it all the way in. That boot should go up and over that top rib. Like that. Press and release a couple of times. Give it a little twist. As long as everything moves freely, you're good. If and when you press this down, you have a whole bunch of grease squeeze out here, go ahead and clean that up. Also, if you have a whole bunch of grease squeeze out there, it usually means you put in too much. All right, so we got a light coat on here. Just gonna put a little extra at the bottom. And we're gonna press this into place as well. And now we're ready to take our caliper bracket to the vehicle and finish our brakes. Now we can take our caliper bracket and put it onto our knuckle, put our 2 bolts in. And again, these are going to be 17 millimeters. We're just going to snug these up. Now we're going to come back and torque them down. So now we're going to torque our caliper bolts down to 79 foot-pounds. Now that our caliper bracket is torqued down, we can install our brake pads. We're just going to simply put the bottom tab into the metal slot, push down, and align the top and push into the rotor. Now that you have your pads in and squeezed nice and tight to the rotor, we have 2 last pieces of hardware. They're going to be these spring clips. There are holes on your brake pads. You're just going to squeeze these together and put them in the holes. Sometimes these want to fly out, so watch your eyes and be careful that they might want to run around the room. Okay, now our caliper has a piston inside that squeezes our brake pads. Our brake pads were a little thinner, they were used, so the piston is set out far enough where it needed to make contact. Our new pads are a little thicker, so we're going to have to push this piston back just a little bit more. We're going to use this compression tool to do that. You can use a C-clamp with a couple old pads or an old pad. The idea here is just to push this piston back into this area here as flat as possible, not at an angle. Now that we have our piston pushed back, we can release our tool. And now we can take our caliper, put it on our pads. I'm going to take it off of the hanger. Again, we're going to be careful not to stress the brake hose. Slide it onto our pads and into position for our bolts on the pins. Once it's in position, take one of the 2 bolts and thread it in place to hold our caliper. So with our 2 caliper bolts now snugged up by hand, you want to make sure on the bottom here, your caliper pins, the pieces that we greased earlier, you want to make sure they align with the caliper. There's a slot that those pins will sit into, which will stop the pin from spinning when you tighten these down. I'll make sure that's aligned. If it's misaligned, you may also not be able to get your bolt in. So we've got those both aligned, top and bottom. And now, with our 14 millimeter socket, we can tighten these down to 25 foot-pounds. Now that we have our caliper installed, we had to press back our piston, which means now we're going to have to pump our brakes and bleed our brake line. We want to make sure we didn't introduce any air or anything into that line. Typically when you do this, you won't introduce any air because you haven't opened a line. but you have moved fluid far enough back where you want to make sure it's all the way forward and ready to go when you start and drive your vehicle. So to do this, we're going to use a 10mm socket. We're going to open up our bleeder screw. We're going to wait for some fluid to come out. We're going to look for no hesitation, no break, and no air bubbles in that line. Once we get that, we can close this back up, go up top of the vehicle, check our brake fluid level. We want to make sure that it's full to where it needs to be. If we need to add any, we'll go ahead and do that. So now, with a 10mm, we'll open this up. We'll check our fluid, make sure here we're not getting any breaks or air bubbles in the line. Looks pretty good. We'll go ahead and close it up and tighten it down. And again, once you're done with this step, you're going to want to go up top, check your brake fluid level, and if you're low, go ahead and add some. And one thing I like to do now that you've released some brake fluid out of here, is go ahead and hit it with some brake clean. Clean up any residual brake fluid that there may have been. What this will do is once this is dried up, it'll let you know if you have any leaks, because then you'll see a wet area. If you have any leaks, go ahead and address them. And so now we can install our wheel. Sometimes when I'm having an issue centering or getting the wheel on nice and flat, I like to do a top nice and tight, push in, do a bottom nice and tight, and then rock back and forth till I get those two nice and tight. And that usually helps me get a wheel nice and flat. All right, now we can do the other ones. Come in here with our 19mm. Just snug these up. All right, now to torque these down, we're going to have to put the vehicle on the ground so the wheel doesn't spin. Now that our vehicle's on the ground, we're going to torque our lug nuts down to 80 foot-pounds. We're going to do it in a crisscross pattern. And then sometimes, if you really feel the need to, you can run around a second time just to make sure. And that's it. So now at this point, you're going to want to check your brake fluid level. Make sure that you are between, on this vehicle, the maximum here and the minimum is going to be down here. We're right up here even after bleeding our brakes, so we're perfectly fine. If you were down between these lines, feel free to add to about where we are now. That's a safe zone. If you have to add fluid, to be sure of what fluid you need on this vehicle, you can open your cap and it'll tell you right on the top, .3 or .4 brake fluid.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.